Hi there, welcome to Showcase Sale, and today we're coming to you from Sleepy Hollow, New York, formerly known as Tarrytown, New York. So we're on the road, we're having a great time so far. Stay tuned, it's a great program. We're going to be going on a tour at the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. We are the Rip Van Winkle group. Come with us.
Got another one of those urns up there at the top of this one. A little shroud over the top. Urn, the cremation urn, again, a symbol of death. And hey, if you're going to do the symbol of death, may as well throw a funeral shroud over the top in case you didn't get the death imagery the first time. All right, awful bright light over there in the trees. I'm hoping that's the village's park over there, not us. Who knows? This is the grave of Joshua Miner. Nice large family plot here, by the way. Another nice iron railing around the corners of it. Those of you in front, notice the railing also continues across the steps. Go figure. It's not going to keep anyone in or out. I have no idea why it goes across the steps. No, you're good. You're fine. No worries. By all accounts, Joshua Miner was a handsome and charming man. He was born in the great state of Ohio, and as a young man, he took very quickly to his family's business. Now, his family was basically engaged in the very lucrative trade of organized crime. Joshua Miner came from a long line of counterfeiters, con men, and horse thieves, so says his obituary. He himself, you gotta have a specialty, you know. He himself specialized in counterfeiting. It's good to have a trade. You gotta make a living. He himself was specialized in counterfeiting. As a fairly young man, he spent time in the Ohio State Penitentiary system for counterfeiting, of course. Jail didn't really suit him well, and on his release, he decided to take his handsome and charming face out of Ohio, where he was too easily recognized, and made his way to upstate New York, where he purchased a farm, seemed to go straight, seemed to stay on the straight and narrow, and did well for himself. Prospered enough that he was able to buy an adjoining sawmill, did okay with both operations, so that he was able to take on employees to help him run both operations, and in fact, he paid those employees with a steady stream of cash, which it turns out was the chief product of that sawmill because he had a printing press in the basement. Did okay for himself and stayed clear of the law until he was caught by an undercover cop while trying to pass a fake $5 banknote. Now, thinking fast, he popped the fake $5 banknote in his mouth and swallowed the evidence, thereby escaping prosecution. But nonetheless, you can imagine when the law has its eyes on you, it might be a good idea to get out of town until things blow over. So back to Ohio he went until things blew over in New York. Back in Ohio, again, he seemed to go straight for a while, seemed to live a clean life, until, of course, he was picked up for counterfeiting again because, well, you know, guys got to eat, got to have a trade. In the Ohio State Pen for the second time, it really didn't suit him any better than the first time. So at his earliest convenience, he escaped from jail and made his way back to New York State. Back in New York, he seems to have picked up some loot that he must have stashed somewhere along the way, because back in New York State, for the second time, he resurfaces in New York City. Now he hits on a good scheme in New York City. He purchases a contracting business that specializes in paving New York City streets with cobblestones. It's the 1860s, and that's your material of choice. Now, getting those government contracts is a great thing. It's a lucrative business if you can get them. Joshua Miner hits on a great way to get those government contracts. He pays off local politicians to steer them his way. It works beautifully. He gets the contracts, the politicians get some extra income. Life is good. Things go really well for Mr. Miner, but of course, you know, when you got a trade, it's good to practice it. So ultimately, of course, he sets up a couple of printing plants on the side, and those printing plants really take off. He's in cahoots at that point with some of the best engravers in town. They're churning out such a high volume of counterfeit banknotes on the side that they flood the countryside with counterfeit money. Ultimately, of course, this gets noticed by the feds, and when that happens, they come looking for a known counterfeiter, and of course Mr. Miner is a known counterfeiter, and he's seen about town smoking a big cigar watching his paving crews, so, you know, they figure he's up to something. But his gang is pretty close-lipped this time, and they escape prosecution for quite a while. Until, in the classic fashion, a lower-level member of the gang gets picked up on some insignificant charge, and to save his own skin, turns coat on the boss, and agrees to participate in a sting operation. Joshua Miner and his chief engraver are lured into a sting in which they are caught selling counterfeit printing plates to an undercover cop in broad daylight on a public street. Should be a slam dunk for the government. It's not. That was the high point of their case. Things go downhill very rapidly from there. Miner brings in all those politicians that are on his payroll, and they testify to his good behavior. Hey, they're kind of stuck too. They don't want to go down with him. Not only that, his co-defendant, his chief engraver, who's supposed to turn state's evidence against him, instead escapes from jail and is never seen again. The case collapses, Miner's acquitted, and he goes back to his contracting business. During that counterfeiting trial, his wife Sarah dies. He purchases this plot here and has her buried here and has its monument put in. We have no records of what he used to pay for the plot, and we're not looking now. We don't want to know. His contracting business ultimately failed. His last appearance in court was not for counterfeiting, but to declare bankruptcy. Hey, without the counterfeiting, it's tough to make a go of it. So he lived out the last few years of his life in relative poverty. He died in the home of his niece Mary. She is also named on the monument. Let me hit that for you. We got Joshua, his wife Sarah, and niece Mary. Joshua's buried there, JDM. In case you missed it, my wife. He may have had other issues. And Mary is buried over here somewhere. All right, we're still in the Victorian era here, by the way. You've got an obelisk over here. You've got an obelisk over there. Here an obelisk, there an obelisk. There an urn, here an urn. How about we go look at something completely different? Let's go look at some soaring Gothic monument around the corner. Why not? It's a good night, little moonlight, looks pretty creepy. So follow me. Don't worry, I'll be lighting this up like a Christmas tree real quick here. This is the monument of Owen Jones. Now, before I light it up, let me just give you a little background on Mr. Jones. Owen Jones was born in Wales in the United Kingdom. His family emigrated to the States when he was a small child. They settled near Rochester, New York, where the family opened a dry goods store. Now, dry goods is simply the precursor to today's department stores. They were, in the retail business. As a young man, Jones would strike out on his own. The family did okay up in Rochester, but Jones wanted to go for the big time. He moved down to New York City, where he did strike it big. He set up a retail operation that thrived, did very well. He ended up, at the end of his life, having a very vast and sprawling retail operation. And, of course, all the real estate that came with it, he owned as well. At the time of his death in 1884, his estate was worth about $2 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $50 million in today's dollars. He did okay for himself. So much so that he has this nice monument here. Now, Owen Jones had two sons. His two sons were not quite the businessmen that the father was. Within 5 years of the old man's death, they ran the store into the ground, bankrupt. Needing money to keep their lifestyles going, they sued their mother for part of their real estate holdings. So like so many second generation businesses, it did not do well in the hands of the next generation. Now this is a kind of cool monument. Looks like a little Gothic church in miniature. You have like a little Gothic cathedral. You have flying buttresses on either side. Angel of the Resurrection holding the trumpet to blow on the last day to raise the dead. A weeping Mary Magdalene over here. There's a St. John on the other side. Under the canopy, where in a church you might expect the pulpit, you've got Mr. Jones himself. That little Napoleon pose going on there. Looking like the confident businessman that he actually was. Now we presume that the family settled things at some point because they are all buried here. The sons and the mother and the father, they're all, and unless you hear some rumbling, in which case they're at it again. But, the family is all buried here, the two sons and the parents, so things were patched up at some point. Pretty cool looking one there. Looks nothing like the ones around it. It's really cool, kind of unique. It's our only really big Gothic monument here. One of my favorites. All right, let's head around the corner. Been dying to use a little flashlight. There we go. This one spreads light better. This particular plot is the family of John Hudson Hall. Now, Washington Irving was right when he said change the name to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery and you'll draw people from far and wide. Owen Jones is one example of a wealthy person from outside the area. When Owen Jones died, there were a couple of fashionable cemeteries within the city limits, New York City limits. He could have gone to Woodlawn and built himself a nice big mausoleum. He could have gone to Greenwood in Brooklyn and built either a mausoleum or a nice Gothic monument there. But Irving was right, there is that cachet about Sleepy Hollow, so Mr. Jones around the corner opted to be buried here. John Hudson Hall, likewise, a wealthy New York City merchant. John Hudson Hall made a fortune in the paper trade, selling wholesale to printers. So he did well for himself as well. And like Irving said, the name is Sleepy Hollow, and they will come.
Did he know Mr. Miner?
As far as I know, he did not know Mr. Miner, but who knows? Somebody had to sell the paper. So maybe he's selling that special paper that the government only can buy. In any event, that's a sick moose calling, by the way. Now that's our local fire horn there. You'll hear fire trucks roaring by in a few minutes. Sleepy Hollow's not so sleepy when the fire trucks roll out. Anyway, the monument here is kind of interesting. Ladies, I hate to say it, but there are more female figures in stone in the cemetery than male, but what can you do? She looks very heroic. Now, cemeteries are kind of neat. You're all here because, well, it's kind of cool to be walking around by lamplight. But cemeteries are, we're a fairly scenic cemetery. A lot of other cemeteries are fairly scenic. You got a lot of nice trees turning this time of year. A lot of art and architecture out there. If you were to go into a museum and look at work by a famous artist or famous sculptor and you wanted to get right up to it and touch it, forget it. You'd be bumping into plexiglass or tackled by a security guard. Here in a cemetery, and many other cemeteries too, you can walk right up to sculptures by famous artists and sculptors. In this case, this is by Augustus St. Gaudens, one of America's foremost sculptors of the 19th century. Now, St. Gaudens did a number of cemetery installations, and this is... see, I told you it's going to get loud out there. Nothing sleepy about Sleepy Hollow. Augustus St. Gaudens did a number of cemetery installations. This particular figure here is a repeating one that he used in a number of installations. He called it the Angel of Charity. Now, she is angelic. You've got wings on her there. She looks heroic. She looks like a Greek goddess. She actually, in fact, has a wreath of laurel leaves like a Greek goddess would have. Look at that nice flowing robe, beautifully done out of stone. Looks like fabric flowing. Now, to anyone who knew the sculptor, the face on this monument will be instantly recognizable. This is the face not of Mrs. St. Gaudens. This is the face of Davida Johnson, Augustus St. Gaudens' mistress. I can't say what his wife felt about him leaving his mistress's face carved in stone scattered around the countryside, but I know it happened to me if I did that, and it would not be pretty. So, the sculptor, by the way, Mr. Hall is innocent of all this. It's the sculptor whose misbehavior is carved in stone, but people do funny things.
What's she holding?
She is holding a tablet, says In Excelsis Deo, glory to God in the highest.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's head around the corner. Let's head down into the dark part of the hollow here. This is the grave of Francis Pharcellus Church. Now, the stone is deliberately horizontal like that. It didn't fall over. That was just a style of doing monuments at one time. Francis Pharcellus Church was the longtime editorial page writer for the now-defunct newspaper, the New York Sun. Church's particular specialty was tackling religious controversy. And in his long and illustrious career, it would be the year 1897 in which he tackled the stickiest theological question that he would ever encounter in print. Now his boss, the editor of the paper in the fall of 1897, handed him a letter that would challenge Mr. Church to the utmost. And it went something like this. By the way, the letter to the editor to which Mr. Church responded would spur Church to write what is probably the most famous editorial in American journalism. And you'll all be able to, I presume, quote a sentence with me in just a minute. So let me read the letter to the editor that Mr. Church had to respond to. It went like this. Dear editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Now, the grumpy, crusty, curmudgeonly Mr. Church put aside his usual demeanor and came up with a rather gracious reply to young Virginia O'Hanlon, who had signed the letter. And his reply went like this. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would the world be if there were no Santa Claus? It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. That's the awe moment. So, the editorial was picked up and reprinted in the Sun every year until that paper's demise, and in fact you'll see it reprinted, I'm sure, this year too in your local newspapers. So keep an eye out. You've seen Mr. Church. The rich and famous part of the tour, by the way, for those of you that were wondering. All right, just want to make sure they see where we're going. We're actually going to go just into this plot right over here. So now that those folks are within sight of us, they know exactly where we're going. So let's head around the corner here. How's everybody holding up so far? one more little itsy-bitsy hill after this, but we'll get a good little rest here first. Alright, this is the grave of Andrew Carnegie, as most of you have noticed. Andrew Carnegie was born into abject poverty in Scotland. His family would emigrate to the United States, settling outside of Pittsburgh, New York, where they hoped for a better life. Young Andrew was bright and ambitious. He would avoid the factory life that awaited most of his family. He would end up owning the factories rather than working in them. He would make a fortune first investing in oil. He would make a much larger fortune later in life through owning steel mills and operating steel mills. In his first few years in the States, his father went to work in a textile factory operating power looms. As a 5-year-old boy, Andrew was sent to work, child labor laws not being really that strictly enforced at the time, was sent into work as a 5-year-old to shuttle bobbins of thread between the power looms that his father was operating. Andrew would go on to apprentice himself to a telegraph operator, would jump from there to the railroad industry, and then from there vault himself into the steel industry, in which he made a huge fortune. About 20 years before he died, he decided that he was going to be, not knowing when he was going to die, but it happened that it was about 20 years before he died, he decided to retire from running his vast steel mill operation and set about giving his fortune away. He sold out his vast business interests to J.P. Morgan, the wealthy American financier, and then set about giving away what was at the time about $350 million. In today's money, that would be about $7 or $8 billion. Andrew donated nearly 3,000 libraries to various municipalities in the U.S. and the United Kingdom. He would establish institutions of higher learning. He would establish pension funds for teachers and firefighters. He would establish a foundation to promote world peace. Did a world of good with the money that he earned. Late in life, he purchased this plot here. When he died in Lenox, Massachusetts, where he had a summer home. He had his main residence on Fifth Avenue, New York City. He did purchase this plot here intentionally. He knew about it before he died. Had this rather modest Celtic cross, but here, very simple, very modest monument for a guy who was fabulously wealthy. He is buried adjacent to his wife Louise. They are buried next to each other. Speaking of grave robberies, they were worried about grave robberies. The two Carnegies are buried in supposedly grave robber-proof concrete vaults. They must have heard about Darling Leo. There is a nice little touching story about that, though. They are buried, by the way, Andrew's under there, Louise is under there. Don't get nervous, they're dead. Although the vaults are basically impenetrable to anyone from the outside, there is a passageway in between them so that if there is a life after death, they have the means to communicate in the afterlife. Behind you folks over here, some little gravestones. Those little gravestones are family employees. The Carnegies did allow several family employees to be buried here as well. So one of the benefits of working for the Carnegies, not only salary, but gravesite. Kind of like the pharaohs. Keep the help with you in death. Yeah, nothing like that.
Is there coins on there?
Good question. There are indeed coins in there.
Oh yeah.
That started about a year ago. We don't know why, but one fine October evening, I walked in here and my lantern just caught glitter everywhere. Somebody had emptied their change jar and put a coin in every crack and crevice. And people have kept it up ever since. We have a habit of taking the quarters, dimes, and nickels off and throwing it into the gravestone restoration fund and leaving the pennies there. But you know, people inexplicably seem to, it's caught on that people come and leave money on Andrew Carnegie's grave. We don't know why. Someone has also sent him flowers. Those flowers were placed here about 3 weeks ago. The note before it disintegrated in the last rainstorm said something to the effect of thanking Andrew and his wife Louise for their help in getting this well-wisher a job. Maybe he's a patron saint of job seekers at this point, but somebody who knows why. I don't know anything about it, but somebody apparently believes that the Carnegies helped the person in getting a job. Who knows? Maybe people are leaving money hoping that it'll rub off too. I don't know. Anyway, all right, we do have a couple of rich and famous people who left rather elaborate monuments to themselves. Should we head on up the hill and look at some pretty big mausoleums? Sure. It will be the last hill, I promise. After this, it'll be all downhill. One more little hill up, and then... I think that I brought you to a decrepit old mausoleum here. It's not fallen apart, and nor are they building a new addition on it. This is the mausoleum of William Rockefeller. You recall down by a receiving vault, I mentioned he spent a year and a half in the receiving vault while he waited for the mausoleum to be constructed. Well, like a house, a mausoleum needs upkeep every once in a while. So it's undergoing a bit of restoration work here. Now, the Rockefeller Mausoleum itself is pretty well constructed, not a lot of seams, but every once in a while you got to cut out the old mortar, regrout it, and do all kinds of other good stuff. they're actually doing a nice restoration of the surface of it as well. So they got some really professional, really high-grade professional mausoleum restorers there. Believe it or not, that is a profession, mausoleum restoration. So it's undergoing a really rather intense restoration of the structure and the facade as well. William Rockefeller with his brother John D. Rockefeller Sr. were the dominant partners in the Standard Oil Company in the late 19th, early 20th century. They were among the most powerful men on the planet. The two Rockefeller brothers were born in Ohio. They came to dominate the oil industry first in the discoveries of petroleum in Pennsylvania and then across the country. At the peak of their power, they would control 90% of the oil production and distribution in the U.S. That was a lot of control over the U.S. economy. Too much for the federal government to let go unchallenged. So the feds, when it became evident that the Rockefellers had that much grip over the economy, the feds did, using antitrust regulation, split up their Standard Oil Company. When the feds dismembered the Standard Oil Company, William ended up running the Standard Oil Company of New York. Anyway, the Rockefeller brothers did live locally in their wealthy years. William had a big estate down on the waterfront in what today is Sleepy Hollow. The mansion is now demolished. His brother John D. Sr. had a big estate up on the hill. That side of the family still has control of that estate. William is the only major Rockefeller we have here. His brother John D. Sr., the dominant partner in Standard Oil, buried back in Cleveland, Ohio. John D. Sr.'s descendants have a private cemetery on their own estate. So Nelson and the other big names that you know, they're buried on their own home turf. William, like the rest of the Rockefellers, even if there weren't this construction screen here, that glass door there, frosted glass. William liked his privacy like the rest of the Rockefellers. So we can't peek inside at the 20 crypts in there. Of the 20 crypts, 19 are full. If you can prove you're a Rockefeller, the 20th one may be for you. Mr. Archbold across the street, one of their partners in Standard Oil, was something of an exhibitionist. He has nice clear glass doors. Should we go take a look at what oil money can buy you? Sure. Igloo, it also looks like something maybe out of the Greek Orthodox Church. Looks like something out of Constantinople. Looking at the side of the mausoleum, you might think, hey, he is Greek Orthodox. There are little Greek crosses on either side of the door. Nope, he was Episcopalian. Traditional Latin cross over the door, covering both sides of the church, Eastern and Western. On the door, peacocks, a Middle Eastern symbol of eternal life. You can guess where this is going, right? Inside, when I light up the interior of the mausoleum for you in a moment, that mosaic over the door is continued in the ceiling. In the ceiling, you will see the continuation of a broad range of religious symbols. You'll see the dove representing the Holy Spirit. You will see saints. You will see angels. You will see the Star of David repeated across the ceiling. He's, I guess, covered his bases in the afterlife. Good to be prepared no matter what's waiting for you. Mr. Archbold, again, partner in the Standard Oil Company with the Rockefellers. He was not always tight with the Rockefellers. When the Rockefellers were consolidating their grip over the oil industry, Archbold was their biggest pain in the neck. He was trying to stymie their efforts to monopolize the oil industry. He was rallying other independent oil operators to resist selling out to the Rockefellers. He lobbied the federal government to rein in the Rockefellers' monopolistic tendencies. He was such a threat to their operations that they stopped him the only way they knew how. They hired him. Once on the other side of the fence, he helped them monopolize the oil industry and defend against the federal government's antitrust lawsuits. So, serves him right. Like the Rockefellers, Archbold lived locally and resides here forever. So let me head up there and I will light up the interior. You're welcome to come up and rotate through and take a peek. Very true.
Wow, yeah, very intricate.
I'm gonna look that up. If he was, that would have been the... Right. Well, now that I've lured you all down here to this bridge, this is not the original bridge from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. The original bridge would have carried the Albany Post Road, today's Route 9, which is now 4 lanes out there. The original bridge would have been closer to our gate by the old Dutch church there. As you can imagine, 4 lanes of highway isn't going to work on a 1-lane bridge, so the original, long gone. But this is the only rustic bridge in the area, so if you got a camera, it's a good time for a Kodak moment or whatever passes for Kodak these days. Now, just because I lured you down here into those pretenses doesn't mean that you won't get something out of it. How about we do a little grave robbery next? cool. You guys brought shovels? All right, I'll have to tell you about a grave robbery instead. Right around the corner, we have a Sleepy Hollow Cemetery's only known episode of grave robbery, but it happens to be close by, so although you kind of walk down here under the pretense that it's a bridge, well, hey, I'll make up for it. Head around the corner with me. A little uneven. There we go. Hope for the best. It rolls down the hill. Oops. It's the dry spot. Fortunately, we're right by the stream, so we can douse it real quick. All right. Right behind me, or right on either side of me, two little granite posts. Back in the leaves behind me, there are two more marking the bounds of this little tiny plot. Now, this is the site of Sleepy Hollow's one and only known grave robbery. Now, the young lad in question, a young lad named Leo, was unceremoniously disinterred from here and carted out of the cemetery one night. Let me tell you about Darling Leo. Darling Leo was a Cocker Spaniel. Darling Leo was the beloved pet of a young lady named Jessie Galender. Jessie Galender lived locally in what today is the village of Sleepy Hollow in the late 1800s. She was the daughter of a wealthy New York City tobacco merchant. When her dog Leo died of natural causes, he lived a long and apparently happy life. When her dog Leo died, she was grief-stricken, as any of us would be, and she took the dog to every local funeral director that she could find, trying to set up a funeral for the dog, full-blown funeral. She wanted a casket, she wanted a viewing, she wanted the whole 9 yards for the dog. She had a little trouble finding a funeral director to take the gig. She finally persuaded one to do the job. So she had her funeral for the dog, had a mahogany casket made, had a bronze plaque on the front inscribed with the words, "My darling Leo," had that affixed to the front of the casket, had a full funeral for the dog, and a procession here into the cemetery. Now, she had in advance persuaded the cemetery superintendent to sell her a plot. Now, at the time, in the late 1800s, it wasn't necessarily illegal to bury a dog in a human cemetery. These days, it's against state cemetery regulations to bury a pet in a human cemetery. But at the time, it wasn't exactly against cemetery regulations. But let's just say that it may have annoyed some of our other plot owners. But nonetheless, she had her funeral, had the dog buried here, and things went okay for Miss Galender for a time. After the dog was buried in here, she would come visit the dog daily to grieve for it. She was truly grief-stricken by her pet's passing. She had an interesting habit, though, that drew a little too much attention to the burial of the dog here. As she came into the cemetery every day, she would collect a group of school children from the area and bring them in with her as professional mourners. She paid the local school children based on the amount of tears they shed on a sliding scale. The more tears the child shed as they were mourning for Darling Leo, the higher the kids paid. This didn't sit well with some of the plot owners up the hill who weren't all that comfortable about the big hullabaloo going on down here about the pet. Particularly one guy, a guy named John O'Keefe, whose plot is immediately behind us across the road, who was very disturbed that a Cocker Spaniel was buried in a cemetery immediately adjacent to where his human ancestors were buried. He protested to our cemetery superintendent, he protested to our board of directors. We kind of said, you know, it's kind of a done deal. Could you maybe let it slide and hopefully she stops after a while? But he was not mollified by anything we said or did. So apparently one night, Mr. O'Keefe, and I say apparently because he never admitted to anything, and apparently Mr. O'Keefe one night took things into his own hands. One morning, Miss Galender came in here to pay her respects to Darling Leo and found that there was instead an open pit. No Darling Leo, no casket, no nothing. Upon investigation, the dog was found in its coffin, intact, nothing open. Dog and casket were found down next to the bridge by our gate. On the other side of the bridge was found that same morning Mr. O'Keefe, where he had apparently fallen off the night before and broken his leg. Now, Mr. O'Keefe said it was a complete mystery to him how the dog and he came to be on opposite sides of that bridge on the same night. But just as you guys seem a little skeptical, most people in town were a little skeptical of his story as well, so people pretty well figured out that he may or may not have, well, they figured he knew a lot more than he was admitting to. So Mr. O'Keefe pretty much laid off after that, and Miss Galender was able to rebury Darling Leo here. She did take the precaution, though. Notice it's an unmarked grave, just little granite posts. She went low-key after that. She took an additional precaution. She had Darling Leo encased in a rather large poured concrete vault. She poured enough concrete into this redug grave here that she estimated it would take a bushel of dynamite to dislodge Darling Leo after that. So we presume Darling Leo has not wandered ever since. Now, this is fairly close to the stream. We actually are we are way too close to the stream here. We would not actually do any human burials over here, so No human burials immediately adjacent to it. By the way, under today's state cemetery regulations, quite illegal to bury a dog in a human cemetery. Not illegal at all to bury a human in a pet cemetery. Go figure. Welcome to New York. By the way, New York State doesn't tell us what to do with all the deer, squirrels, and raccoons that die on our grass every year. So apparently they have a thing against dogs, cats, and parrots and other things.